Nobody should feel sorry for Julian Assange. He's the victim of his own trauma, and now that he's on his way to freedom, it's clear he's benefited from exactly the sort of government confidentiality and secrecy that he's disrespected and jeopardised and railed against. I'll show you that in a moment. But first, here is Assange, overnight our time, boarding a private jet after being released from prison in the UK and flying out of Britain. Assange is likely to arrive in Australia a free man later this week. And watching the media today, you might have got the impression that Australia had found its second saint. You know, first there was Mary MacKillop and now Julian Assange.
And I want to pay enormous tribute to the courage of Julian Assange, who has stood his ground in the face of the United States military. And what was Julian Assange's crime? His crime was calling out the war crimes of the United States military and the complicity of this government in that awful, appalling war.
The hagiographies about Assange are ridiculous. The bloke is a shocker. In fact, the ridiculous efforts to deify him remind me of the life of Brian. Yeah, Assange is no messiah. He's a former computer hacker who's done wrong, and he's very lucky that his country and many others have stood by him and protected his rights. The key reason he's been in various forms of self-imposed and judicial custody is because of his own choices, his own determination to avoid justice. And at least some of those people who have lobbied for his release have also done so while they've been respecting that reality.
If you ask me, do I think what he did was morally correct? No, it wasn't. But the issue for me is extraterritoriality. This was an Australian citizen. He was not a citizen of the United States. He was not in the United States when this felony, as what they said, was created.
A dozen years ago, Julian Assange refused to go to Sweden to face up to sexual assault claims and investigations against him, claiming he was afraid of being extradited to the US over his WikiLeaks dumping of classified documents. And until now, he's refused to go to the United States to face up to charges of obtaining and releasing classified information. So he was holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy in London for years, claiming to be a hero and treated like a hero by the lunar left and the loopy right, but really hiding from accountability. And for the past 5 years, he's been in jail in the UK because he's been fighting that extradition to the United States. And even in recent months, as high-level negotiations have attempted to resolve his case, it could have been ended earlier if he'd agreed to go to the US to formalise a plea deal. But he's too paranoid to set foot on the US mainland. That's why Assange reportedly is heading to the tiny US Commonwealth of Northern Mariana Islands near Guam, where US law applies, but of course he's closer to home. We understand he'll plead guilty to a felony of conspiring to acquire and publish classified information and be given a sentence equivalent to the time he's already served waiting for extradition, and therefore be free to return to Australia. Importantly, he'll return to Australia a convicted criminal, but his incarceration will be over. Excuse me. He'll be feted, of course, by the media and others as a hero, but he most certainly is not a hero. Assange is an anarchist, an activist, and most likely a narcissist, but no hero. Through WikiLeaks, he knowingly made public vast amounts of classified intelligence and other documents that put US sources in foreign countries and others in danger. He didn't carefully analyse it and report what he could, keeping confidential anything that could harm others or jeopardise national security, you know, like a good journalist would. He just dumped the lot out there, essentially to do damage to the US and therefore to its allies and intelligence partners like Australia. For all those reasons, I've got no sympathy for Assange. The deal to get him back here is very familiar to me. It's similar to the one struck for David Hicks, who pleaded guilty to a charge over effectively aiding terrorists in Afghanistan as part of a plea bargain to get home. Now, full declaration, I played a role in getting that deal underway through meetings with Hicks's Australian lawyer when I was Chief of Staff to the then Foreign Minister Alexander Downer. But the same principle applied. That is, US justice had to be served. They couldn't just turn someone loose from Guantanamo Bay when there were charges to be answered. But at the same time, especially here in Australia, there was broad support for the notion that whatever the alleged crimes, Hicks's time in custody had been enough, more than enough. So that's what Hicks did. He pleaded guilty and took a sentence that meant he returned to Australia and spent only a short time in jail. And now Assange is doing something similar, except we're told his sentence will match what he's already served, so he'll return to immediate freedom in Australia. It's worth noting that all this has happened in confidence. There have been negotiations carried out through classified diplomatic cables and the like, and neither diplomats nor politicians nor the media have broken those confidences because that could have jeopardised the process. The Prime Minister was even careful in Parliament today because the arrangements are still unfolding.
The government is certainly aware that Australian citizen Mr Julian Assange has legal proceedings scheduled in the United States. While this is a welcome development, we recognise that these proceedings are crucial and they're delicate. Given these proceedings are ongoing, it isn't appropriate to provide further detailed comment.
So the point is that Assange in these dealings has benefited from the very government secrecy that he's refused to respect and which he rails against. Even his mother seems to recognise this, issuing a statement saying she was grateful her son's ordeal was over and that I am grateful that and that this shows the importance and power of quiet diplomacy. Yeah, quiet diplomacy. Not confidences betrayed, not confidential diplomatic cables made public, undermining national security. Now, let me be clear. I think this is the right outcome. I think the Albanese government and the Biden administration have done the right thing here. This is a sensible outcome. Assange has not gotten away with this scot-free. On the contrary, he's now paid a high price for his own actions. But enough is enough. After all these years, he deserves his freedom. The trouble is, I expect that once he gets back here, he'll probably do what Hicks did and repudiate his own guilty plea. Hicks challenged his conviction in the US and had it overturned on the basis the law didn't exist at the time he was accused of breaking it. Likewise, despite his guilty plea, I could imagine Assange protesting his own innocence when he returns to Australia, and I can imagine him then continuing to campaign against the US the way he's always done. Still, it's a free world, and so be it. But thankfully, his trauma in custody will be over. So from a humanitarian point of view, that's a good outcome. And for most of us, after this week, can we dare to hope that we might not have to bother talking about Julian Assange ever again?